Catholic Social Teaching, the Call to Family, Community, and Participation. Introduction. The Call to Family, Community, and Participation. The call to family, community, and participation is an integral part of Catholic social teaching because the ways that we organize society affect human dignity and our ability to grow in community. The Church emphasizes that marriage and family are the central social institutions that must be strengthened and supported in society. People have a right and duty to participate in society as long as their participation contributes to the common good and well-being of all. Focus issue: the dangers of participating in society during a pandemic. No one knows what solidarity looks like in communities now because of the coronavirus, which is slowly causing social structures around the United States to collapse. Active community members are the ones who have suffered the most from the pandemic, either from a lack of participation or fear of the risks associated with involvement in their respective communities. Church teaching emphasizes the importance of participation in society, but everyone is limited in what they can accomplish because of the pandemic. How the pandemic has affected communities in San Diego. People are urged to stay home and away from public places to prevent community outbreaks. This becomes a major issue when people are urged by health officials to limit their participation in society because the Catholic Church views it as a basic right. Even then, the dangers of participation in society are evident, as seen through a public outbreak of COVID at Awaken Church in San Diego. The San Diego Association of Governments states that 3 in 5 parents have claimed to struggle with their child's distance learning setup. This clearly illustrates the prevalence of issues related to a lack of participation in community because many students' learning needs are not met. Society's reliance on essential workers who keep the economy running has placed a lot of stress on their home life. Many people have experienced a drastic change in workload, affecting the amount of time they spend interacting with their family. Catholic Relief Services has also been providing support to those who have struggled due to the pandemic by providing them with materials to help with online learning or providing funds to those who have lost their jobs. The Church's stance on participation in community during this pandemic. The Church agrees that although participation in community is a given right, it is only acceptable when it benefits everyone in society. In the case of this pandemic, people are hurt both by participation in society and a lack of it. People can become sick and infect others if they actively participate in their communities, but on the other hand, people's mental health and well-being is negatively affected by a lack of participation in society. This Bible verse from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 26 is a great exemplification of the way that Church views participation in community. It states that if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now we enter the photo essay part of my presentation, and I titled it Photos, the Story of Community in San Diego During the Pandemic. This is a photo that I took at a park while I was babysitting some family friends. As you can see, the play structure is completely taped off so that kids are unable to play on it. I chose to include a picture of a playground because I believe that it shows the dangers of a lack of participation in society. The playground is clearly blocked off, showing that kids are not allowed to play on it. Children are still developing, and a lack of stimulation and social interaction can be extremely detrimental to them. Unfortunately, they are less likely to get sick from COVID, but can still pass the virus onto their family members and friends. Their participation in community may not act as a direct threat to them, but it could hurt others. They are forced to face the consequences of the pandemic as a result, which negatively impacts their lives. This is a picture of the hospital that my dad works at, and I chose to take a picture in this particular location because if you look on the left-hand side behind the ambulance, you can see a white tent, and those are actually the COVID tents for this particular hospital. I chose to include a picture of a hospital because I believe that they are a major part of communities at the moment. Hospitals are forced to take in countless COVID patients while the staff risk their own health to help them. Hospitals are the center of society because they are keeping it from crumbling just by helping people who are ill during this pandemic. Their role is important during this pandemic because they are making sure that the pandemic doesn't progress at rapid rates and help everyone who needs it during this time. Without the quick response rate of hospitals to the circumstances of this pandemic, the death rate would have been much worse and communities would have been much more negatively affected. This next picture is of Cathedral Catholic because it is one of the few schools in San Diego that has successfully incorporated a hybrid learning schedule into their everyday academic setting. I chose to include a picture of Cathedral because it is one example of promoting positive participation in society during this time. Cathedral is following everything the church teaches about participation in society. Through our hybrid learning schedule, we are protecting people by reducing the risk of COVID, but also ensuring that all kids are able to receive a quality education and interact with their peers. Many high schoolers are struggling right now because of online learning, so implementing the hybrid learning model has impacted our school community positively. This next picture is a picture of some of my friends at our gym, which has instituted special COVID guidelines such as social distancing, mask wearing, and special sanitation processes. I chose to include a picture of my friends at our gym because this is another example of promoting positive participation in communities while considering the health and well-being of all. Our gym has a mandatory mask policy to protect its members from contracting COVID, which takes into consideration the safety of all. The church emphasizes that participation in community is only a given right if it positively affects others, and this is evident through my gym's efforts to remain open during the pandemic. All workouts are outside and socially distanced, with no shared equipment and proper sanitizing. Everyone is held accountable, and the social interaction and exercise is beneficial for the mental and physical health of all those who choose to participate. This is a picture of a church, and I saw it while I was passing through Coronado. One thing that I noticed about this church was that it mentioned it had healing services on Thursdays at 10 a.m., which is very fitting for the times of this pandemic. I chose to include the image of a church because they are one of the many communities whose strength has been displayed throughout the pandemic. Churches have struggled to find ways to allow people to worship while also keeping them safe, having major negative effects on those who used to participate weekly. Now, masses are either online or limited to a certain number of people, so not everyone has the ability to worship as they once did. This tests the faith of many, but they remain steadfast even when they cannot attend a physical mass. This next picture is of a post office, which is one of the many ways that people have managed to stay connected during the pandemic. I chose to include this image of a post office because I believe it represents the way that people are able to stay connected during this extremely difficult time. If people cannot meet physically, mail is one of the ways to communicate that poses little risk and helps support the community by not spreading COVID. The post office is symbolic of the ways that people have found unconventional ways to participate in society and communicate during this time, which is beneficial to the health of many and allows people to be productive members of society. This next picture is of a community center, which has many signs indicating that it is closed because of the pandemic. I chose to include this image of a community center because it is representative of how our communities have been shut down due to the pandemic. The particular community center I photographed was closed down, with multiple signs in front of it to indicate this. The closing of the community center shows how many places and events have been shut down, negatively affecting how society functions as a whole. Even though not having access to a community center seems like a small problem, it is able to highlight the larger and more difficult issues that people are dealing with. People are having their workplaces shut down and are losing their jobs as a result. The shutdown of certain aspects of communities is extremely detrimental and negatively affects people in different ways depending on their circumstances. For this picture, I chose to photograph an elementary school. I chose to include the image of an elementary school to emphasize the problems that the pandemic has been causing regarding the shutdown of school communities, specifically for elementary school students. Students of all ages are struggling with online learning, but it has an even larger negative effect on students who are younger in age. Younger students require certain amounts of social interaction and engaged learning experience per day because their brains are in a period of plasticity, where every interaction helps shape how they think. Unfortunately, the shutdown of schools has caused these students to suffer mentally, even if it prevents the spread of COVID-19. The next picture I chose to include was of a beach in Coronado. I chose to include a picture of the beach because it is representative of the ways that people still are able to participate in society. One major way that people manage to participate in communities despite the restrictions the pandemic has imposed is by enjoying and experiencing nature. The pandemic has pushed people to go out and enjoy God's creation, helping people develop a new appreciation for nature. Although people have to socially distance, going out into public areas of nature are great ways to socialize and participate in community without risking spreading COVID-19 to anyone, as long as a mask is worn. The final picture that I am including in this presentation is of a discarded mask I saw while I was on a walk. I chose to include this picture of a discarded mask on the ground because I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that the use of masks can be extremely beneficial for us as long as we use them properly. The image of the mask on the ground shows that when discarded, the masks are harmful towards God's creation, but when worn properly, they help protect God's creation. Wearing masks while participating in society is a great way to protect everyone while also interacting with them. The church encourages protecting God's creation, so using masks to protect our bodies is encouraged by the church. As a part of God's creation, we are responsible for protecting ourselves and others, and by wearing masks, we are able to do this. Conclusion. Participation in communities has been extremely challenging since the start of the pandemic, but it is important to find safe ways to contribute to society. Both participating and not participating in society can be detrimental to people's health, so it is important to find ways to participate that protect the lives of everyone involved. The church encourages active participation in communities as long as the safety of everyone is considered beforehand, so that everyone can benefit from it. Here is my Works Cited page, and thank you for listening.